Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of SEN Talks. We're here with Adam.
Hi, everyone.
And we're here today to talk about SEN and recreational activities and sport in particular. Now, we know that, and you will know from being in the community, being a SEN parent or being involved in the SEN world in any way, shape or form, that generally it is really difficult for our neurodiverse children to participate in a lot of recreational activities. I'm talking about youth clubs, sports clubs, a lot of team sports particularly, not just because of the social aspect, but also the teaching and the training aspect of those recreational activities. So, for example, if you take your child to Sunday morning football, for example, it's usually, particularly because we live in England, it's usually in a sports hall, especially if they're very small. The echo-ness of the space is usually awful. There are usually many children running around. There are many parents around the edge of that sports hall. There are, let's say, 20 children. The teacher or the person leading the session is speaking to everybody at the same time. There's no visual aids, etc. And something that is not geared towards neurodiverse children. Now, on young people. And because of that, unfortunately, a lot of our neurodiverse children are left out of those kind of things. But we are starting to see that service come into its own. What do you think? I think it's starting to come into its own.
I think the first point that I would come at is most parents, or I suppose a lot of dads, I won't be so sweeping as that, when they're having a child, the thought is, oh, I'm going to have a child, maybe they can play football at a high level or rugby at a high level. And
it's the dream.
It's the dream. And the idea is being part of a kind of local community, part of a clubhouse, and, sharing that experiencing and I suppose bonding with other dads about sport. And I certainly think that I was one of those parents. So when I was a kid, I played a lot of rugby. And in fact, I played rugby at a kind of higher level. So I played for Island Youth when I was older. And for me, as someone who's severely dyslexic, before I could really demonstrate, I suppose, that I was academically able, sport was a way that I excelled and I showed people, what I was capable of. So, when I was having my own kids, I felt that was going to be something that I could share as a bond with my kids.
Yeah, naturally.
I think whenever one goes into that maternity ward expecting their kid to come out, in some respects, I imagine it's a little bit vain. We all have this idea that you're going to get maybe a mini version of you with all the best bits and not necessarily getting that.
Yeah, of course.
And for me, with both my boys, I did try and do some of the sports stuff when they were really young. So we did rugby tots with F, my oldest. And it was too much for him, too much kind of need for concentration, too much activities around him, lots of swapping and changing activities that he just couldn't cope with. And for me and Scarlett at the time, when it would have been about 3 or 4, we were really just starting to see that it was slightly different from everyone else, but not really understanding that and wondering whether it was just something that he would grow out of or something that, he would change over time. In hindsight, I think we probably, with ignorance, like all first-time parents, probably handled that situation pretty badly. And we took him to rugby tots for probably about 6 weeks, really pushed him to go, even though he didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And I think he spent a lot of the time hiding behind a tree rather than engaging. And I think it was at that moment that me and Scarlett really started to understand that was not coping with that, and that it wasn't something he was really engaging with. I'd like to say that I learnt my lesson well, but I remember thinking with who is a different kind of flavour, I suppose, of autism, that he seemed much more sporty, and that he would probably really enjoy going to rugby tots. So there is me probably going up to a taster session, thinking this time I was going to get my next generation England rugby player or Ireland rugby player, and just literally had a silent meltdown and dived straight to the floor. And I went, oh, okay, we're not doing this again, and decided at that stage it wasn't time for that kind of sport.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that I often talk about, maybe not so much in the podcast, but the one thing I think is really missing out there across the country is activities at weekends and after schools designed for kids with SEN.
Yeah, I agree.
Unless you can access mainstream clubs, there is only a few small groups, I think, across the country, which really are accommodating and engaging need. And often I think some of the problems are some of the groups are for more significant needs. Some of the groups are mainstream, and if you can access that most of the time, they'll include you. But if you're that kind of SEN-betweener who can't really engage with mainstream, but your needs, I suppose, are not severe enough for some of the other kind of groups, you're kind of left with nothing. And that's not just about sports clubs. That's also about, summer holidays and Christmas holidays when everyone else is doing sports clubs or holiday clubs. Unless you can find something which accommodates, you're kind of left with nothing. And I always think there's a good reason why lots of parents with SEN are unable to work. It's because there isn't those clubs where you can send your kids to. So you're always trying to swap and change your holidays around to try and find something, or just give up and accept that throughout your holidays, you'll be looking after the kids and there will be very little respite. So I think it's an area which is improving, but I don't think it's there in any way or sense of the word yet. But because we're doing this podcast near Christmas and I wanted to have some good examples, you have to do your homework. There are a lot of really good parental WhatsApp groups for kids with SEN out there.
Yeah.
I tend to stay off those groups because I think being an SEN lawyer, it feels wrong to be on those groups. But I know a lot of parents who come to me and say they're in those groups and there's some good communities or sports groups, etc. One of the ones there's a couple that our kids access at the moment. One of them is run by Fulham, which is Access Autism. And they have a couple of clubs happening at weekends across London. Luckily for us, one of them is quite close, and it is quite amazing. There are about 3 or 4 coaches. All of them have autism experience and are really inclusive. Some weeks, to start off with my youngest, he couldn't really engage, so he sat on the side until he got to the stage where he felt comfortable. And then we went for a stage where he was engaging really well for a couple of weeks. And then we had a couple of off weeks. The great thing about them is they're not pushy. They don't blow a whistle at you and expect you to come and engage in activities. One of the coaches just simply said to me, look, if he'll engage where you can take the football off into the nets over there, just you and him, then that's engaging. That's something he's getting out of it. And for a couple of weeks, that's what we did. I think what was great about it, as kind of good practice, is even before we went down to our first session, an email was sent to us. There was a picture of the coach, a picture of the pitch that we were going to.
Yeah, just know what they're doing, don't they?
Yeah, really amazing. And with the interesting thing is we did it for to start off with because he didn't have an activity at the weekends. And he really engaged well with it. And I took my oldest son down as well to kind of watch from the sidelines, and within about 5 minutes he was involved, and it's been really good because they both take part. I think has ended up being a good role model for kind of involvement, so it's been really good. And from that, and a great source of information is the Autism Society. So I had a look on that to see if there was any clubs that the boys could access. And one of the things I was looking at was autism boxing. And amazingly, there's a club down the road from us which does an autism boxing session at the weekends, running for 4 years. Actually, I think this weekend is its 4th year anniversary, which I think is amazing. And when I took last week, what was amazing was there was a mix of kids with autism who were in mainstream, kids with autism who were in special, but they were all being able to really engage with them. From my understanding about the research, the kind of feeling of hitting a bag, I think it's your proprioceptive skills. You get good feedback from it if you're kind of an autism profile who has kind of sensory and motor difficulties.
Yeah, which is really common.
Yeah, and again, a bit like the football, what amazed me was he came into the room, the coach said to him, "Are you okay?" And he knew his name before he came in, and he said, I'm actually feeling a bit nervous. And he said, "Okay, well, come over here." And he showed him a visual timetable of what was going to happen at the session, the places he needed to be, and really made sure that throughout the session, and it's only a small group of kids with about three or four coaches, so it's like a 2-to-1 adult to pupil ratio, student to ratio, really engaged well with it. And there's no judgment about the skill of people. There's no kind of pushing because they wanted the kids to be, at a higher level. It was just being inclusive. And the kids who were, getting to a stage which was higher, they're making sure that they were adapting to that.
Yeah.
And for those first-time beginners, there was a real kind of focus on ensuring that they felt included, felt like there was no judgment.
Yeah.
And that was really positive. And again, a really good example of something which was available for kids and was being supported, I think, by our local authority through their local offer and through the Autism Society as well, which was why it was a well-funded, good session.
This is the other thing, though, because you're saying like you have a small space and you have 2-to-1 support, right? Who is funding this? Where are these places getting their money from? Where are these people who are running it getting their training from? Because, something is either a business or a charity. And whether you're a business or a charity, you need money to be able to run it. So where is that money coming from? So
it's usually charity donations that a lot of them are getting it, or they're affiliated with a society or a group like that. There isn't. I don't think there's much coming from government in that regard. Which, again, if you think about,
shame, isn't it?
Well, if you think about most of the kids who have education, health, and care plans in mainstream schools, and you think about the amount of support they need to be within those settings, but you go, okay, well, we're not going to put anything on at the weekends.
Yeah.
So straight away, you're kind of recognising in order to engage in education, they need a lot of support. Yeah. But in order for them to be able to be included in society, you're giving them nothing.
You just think about, like, when we do education and healthcare plans, obviously, there is a social care section, and many of our listeners will know about that. And you think, like, the amount of money that's coming through for direct payments, and you think, yeah, that's great, right? And it's something, and that's better than nothing. But what do people do with that? Versus if you put like 3 or 4 of these different recreational activities in every borough, instead of paying those direct payments, you could just offer these things out, these sessions out to these young people and these children, which arguably would be much more beneficial for them if you put out stuff like boxing, football, a SEN sensory gym, for example. I know that we've got, we're regularly kind of posting about a Centurion who is a guy called Dan who's helps children with neurodiversities and training and exercise, and we know that is a fantastic outlet for them, but needs to be in a particular way.
So I'd jump back at you and say there could be both, because I think the reality is, as a parent of 2 kids with SEN, having kids with SEN, it's more expensive in terms of you have to find child support which has that kind of level of experience. So even like finding a babysitter, first of all, if a kid will accept a babysitter with some kind of the needs that we deal with, might be something. But if you do, you usually need to have someone who has an understanding of SEN and is able to appropriately look after them. So you can't just ask for your local, 16-year-old to kind of do the babysitting for you.
Yeah, of course.
And I think on top of that, Tammy, who we've had on the podcast before talking about disabled living allowance, she once said to me that she helps at a food bank and she had to train staff to understand that where a parent says, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but do you have a branded product like Heinz ketchup?" They're not saying that if they have a kid with SEN because they're being difficult about it. It's usually because with their child, they won't take anything which isn't that particular type of ketchup, for instance.
Yeah, I know she was talking about the butter, wasn't she? And the fact that she had like a copious amount of butter at one point in her house, and it's all a particular brand. And the one time she said no, it was just a mess at the supermarkets. It was just easier to say yes.
And you sometimes face things that you're not expecting as well.
Yeah.
Like you could be getting ready to go to school, and suddenly you're experiencing a quite significant meltdown. And in order to get your child to school, it might be that you have to order an Uber to take your child to school.
Yeah.
So I think the kind of disabled living allowance recognises that bringing up children with SEN is more expensive. And I think that's good. But that doesn't mean that you can't policy-wise also deal with the other aspects. So, we have sports clubs across the country. Why isn't it something that we say, okay, well, if you're going to receive, lottery funding, we want to see that you are creating a program so you can be inclusive of kids with SEN.
Yeah. Fair argument, good idea.
We talk about the fact that the government is looking at making mainstream better at understanding need. And some of that they're already talking about, and I can't believe we're in 2025 and we're only saying it now, making sure when teachers are trained that they have training in teaching and supporting children with SEN.
That's still not happening yet, is it?
I think completely crazy that it's like, isn't this a brilliant idea? I think it should have been a brilliant idea about 20 years ago, not now. But the same could be with coaches. There's no reason why we can't train up coaches as part of the coaching qualification to understand how to teach and support someone with neurodiversity. If anything I've learned over the years, if you support, if you develop those strategies, usually those strategies are beneficial to everyone. We always talk about this, about emotional regulation boards. You go into most primary schools now, there's an emotional regulation board.
Yeah.
Those were created as a way of supporting children with SEN. And then we're like, oh, actually, this is brilliant for every kid.
Yeah.
Same with even phonics. When I was in a specialist dyslexic school, phonics was a kind of new idea and approach for teaching students with dyslexia.
Yeah.
And now all schools do it.
Yeah.
So if you want to bring in change and make, say, sports clubs and holiday clubs more inclusive, then you kind of need to look at ways of giving incentive for those sports clubs and settings to be more inclusive.
Yeah, making it more inclusive.
Yeah.
Bringing everybody in from the cold, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be hats off to Fulham and setting up the autism football, because I think it's brilliant. Same with the local boxing, which has been set up, I think, by the Autism Society. The other one that has been simply amazing is Keen Club, which is a weekend club for students with any kind of disabilities, really. And it's like 2-to-1 support. Lots of volunteers come and help, and they're usually set up within schools at weekends. And what's amazing about it is it recognises that parents need a break.
Yeah.
So they will support and look after those children. I think they do it for 2 hours a weekend. And they do it over 2 years before they say, your child's had this for 2 years, so we're going to pass it on to someone else. The reason for that is they have such a high demand that they can only keep that placement available for 2 years.
Naturally.
Which is sad, because, hopefully if you had everyone doing similar things in their sports centres across the country, it shouldn't be, here's 2 years and then we have to find something else. It's a shame. I think money is tight at the moment as well in all local authorities. We hear that a lot. With my youngest son, he used to do a gymnastics club at his local sports centre, I suppose it is. And they basically cancelled it because the coach who was doing it moved to a different local authority, and they didn't have someone who had SEN experience. And again, you're like, if you had all coaches...
Yeah, it wouldn't have been an issue. Yeah, exactly. Whereas it's seen like as a specialist qualification at the moment, whereas it should really be standard, because it's big. Something like 1 in 5 children in the classroom have got a neurodiversity or some kind of SEN. You just think, if you've got a class of 30, you've got 5 people in the class, who potentially 5-6 people in the class who've got neurodiversity. Why do we still have en masse teaching staff who don't really know anything about it? And I've said before, I've got many friends who are teachers, and they say, like, we want to know more about this, and we want to be able to help those other children in the class better, be able to recognise the neurodiversity or the SEN better, so that we can help these children, and that help can get to them quicker, and potentially the issue not escalate, the young person not regress. But it's not catching up at the minute.
So I think it's quite an old study now. But there's a study, I think it was about 2010, which looked at the roles of teachers and learning support assistants in supporting kids with SEN.
Yeah.
What it found in mainstream schools at the time, I believe, was that learning support assistants were better skilled and trained, even though they don't have a qualification as a teacher, at delivering provision for kids with SEN, whereas the teachers were not. And often when teaching in a class of 30, I do wonder how much teacher time the kid with SEN in the corner gets, or whether they're just set aside with a learning support assistant.
Classic example, isn't it, of the least qualified person teaching the child who needs the most help and most support.
Yeah, I would say that, but I would also say...
Respectfully, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, particularly with both my kids, the schools that they have attended, I feel like the teachers have been really kind of upskilled about supporting, and the learning support assistants in that environment, I think, is a rarity, actually.
Yeah.
Have been with the school for a long time, so have built their experience over a long time.
That is a rarity for TAs, actually.
Yeah, so usually turnaround in a lot of schools is of learning support assistants and teachers, I'd say 2 years. If you have a school which has turnaround less than that, then you're looking at, I usually find, a very good school. So if you've got turnaround over 3 or 5 years, usually that's a sign of a good setting.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But yeah, with the sports side of things, both my sons are now engaged at activities at the weekend.
Good.
They're in clubs which really understand their needs.
Yeah.
I think it has a really good impact on their emotional well-being and their feeling of being included. And with both of them, from going from refusing to be part of a kind of sporting experience to one which has been allowed them to be engaged with it, has really made them really into sport, which is great.
Yeah.
So, I think it's helped me bond with my boys more. I also think it is something which has really helped them, and I hope when they're adults, they'll look back at that and feel like it was something which was really beneficial to them.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
I'm sure they will.
So I think the lesson I take from all of this is a bit like our mainstream schools, our clubs, our weekend activities and holiday clubs need to change, and they need to be more inclusive. But again, a bit like our schools, we need to look at the fact that there will be some students who will not be even able to be included in that way, and we need to accommodate that type of need as well. Yeah. And if we say that 38 weeks a year, students are in education, we really need to think about what we're doing that time for the rest of the year when they're not, to make sure that, the learning that they've done is not being lost, but also that they're not at the back of a house somewhere because they can't engage with anything and not forgotten.
And enjoying life.
Yeah.
Yeah, like any child should.
And, with that, I'd say we also got to look at the mental well-being of the parents involved, looking after a child because for a whole summer with very little support, say a child who would be in a special school or a child in mainstream who would usually have full-time learning support assistants, is really hard. And I think in this day and age, often families, they don't live around their, say, parents or where they grew up themselves. So it can be incredibly isolating as well. So sport is a real way of bringing people into the community, and holiday clubs and stuff is also a way of kind of parents being able to bond and make friends as well. So we are isolating people but not including them in that way as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's something that we really need to push on.
Yeah. I agree. Well, thank you very much, Adam, for your being so candid, and thank you everybody for listening.